Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today, I'm dedicating the entire episode to prayers for the Holy Father, Pope Francis, who is in Gemelli Hospital. This is one that we are all too familiar with, Steph and I, from our time in Italy. Steph spent about a month in the hospital. Pope John Paul II was air flighted to Gemelli Hospital after he was shot in 1981. And Pope Francis is there. It's to the north of the city of Rome. You can't take the metro to it, the X-shaped metro, the underground, or anything like that. You have to take a train or a helicopter. So it's a bit north of the city, and he's there. This is an update given by Michael Haynes on Twitter to the effect that Pope Francis has polymicrobial respiratory infection. Now, in an 88-year-old with polymicrobial respiratory infection with only one lung, there is carried a poor prognosis due to the advanced age, the compromised lung function, and the complex nature of a multibacterial infection, which is what polymicrobial means. And it significantly increases the risk of complications and mortality. So we are requesting prayers for Pope Francis. We'll talk about the object of those prayers in half a second. But before we get going, let's just say that it is evening time, falling there in central Italy, Lazio, Rome. The Holy See press office says Francis still has no fever, that's good news, and is continuing the prescribed therapy for polymicrobial infection. Clinical conditions are stationary, the Vatican says, after earlier saying that they'd worsened. So what for us was last night here in the States was earlier in the day. The Holy See press secretary had given the indication that it's kind of a bad situation. Maybe it's leveled off. This is not atypical, parish orphans and retrogrades, for updates on the health of the Holy Father, regardless of who is currently sitting in the chair of Peter. There's often contrary indications about an ailing pope. This happened much with JP2, happened some with Benedict, and then it's happened throughout history in the modern radio and TV era of popes. Pope Francis does continue to read and to be able to receive the Eucharist. How long ago had they said, had they indicated that his condition had worsened? This is about a full day ago. Tests from recent days had shown a polymicrobial respiratory tract infection, which led to further change in treatment. All tests show a clinical complex procedure that will require an adequate hospital stay. That means he's not going to be in and out. As of February 16th evening, they said Francis had a good night. This is yesterday. Clinical conditions are stationary and therapeutic diagnostic process prescribed by the medical staff continues. So you guys know how health stuff in general goes, particularly with the elderly. It can change fast. Pray for the Holy Father, and I would say pray for him that he has his soul in order, and because he's the leader of the world, really, this means this getting your soul in order requires correcting any public errors, any public scandal you've caused. There's plenty of this in Pope Francis's case. So for his sake and ours, the Holy Father and the sheep being shepherded, we hope he corrects any mistakes he's made, any scandal he's created. There's plenty of that to go around, as you know, parish orphans and retrogrades. So I'm hoping whether he's on his way out or not, this will be occasion for him to undo a lot of the scandal. We'll talk a little bit more about the nature of this prayer. How sincere can it be? Very utterly sincere, and all that in 1 second. I want to first take a moment to acknowledge this is the first show I've done live here specific for Rules for Retrogrades in over a week. Late last week, after I returned from Nashville, where we were screening What a Woman Is based on the Case for Patriarchy. The title could change to The Case for Patriarchy of the film, by the way. depending on a few things. We're screening it for the major conservative media there in Nashville. There are several. Lots of amazing comments. And we're waiting to see where the distribution will come out. Hopefully it will be very, very soon. So this is the first show back. It's not a fun show to do, but it's because we've been so busy with what a woman is / the case for patriarchy. I would ask you guys to like this video, support the channel by, of course, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. We're trying to hit our goal of 100,000 subscribers, so click the subscribe button. Also, if you want to support the channel, do it through Locals, and it's connected to this video. You support this channel. I've been kicked off of Patreon. I've lost my job. Do it through Locals. Now, if you want to support my family donatively, that's a different prospect altogether. People know Abby's story and write us all the time. How can we help with Abby? The care, insurance, things like that is really expensive. Lots of brain surgeries are never far from around the corner. That's a donative thing. You can do that through the website, timothyjgordon.com, or you can use the P.O. box. People send stuff there for Abby all the time. But if you want to support the channel, it's through Locals. The way you support yourself best at this time in the history of Western civilization is by getting out of your American blue state, I guess I'm talking to Americans, and get to a red state. Go to realestateforlife.org and get out of any blue state, get to any significantly red state. I got out of the bluest of the blue, got to the reddest of the red, went from California to Mississippi. My family's been here almost 5 years. You guys watched the channel, many of you, at the time we left. Realestateforlife.org is the way to do it. Finally, if you go to timothyjgordon.com, we have classes on marriage, marital workshops. We have how to be single workshop. One will be coming up in middle March, second week of March. Why am I still single? That'll be a live class taught there at timothyjgordon.com. There's also marriage coaching, 2x2 intensive marriage coaching classes. They're not classes, they're meetings through telephone and Zoom with Steph and me. Go to timothyjgordon.com. This is kind of the whole suite of products constituting the Patriarchy Project. No, it's not strictly a term, but that's what we represent, the restoration of patriarchy. So here's the tricky thing. Pope Francis is in bad shape. He's an 88-year-old man, and he's got polymicrobial upper respiratory infection. He's been in Gemelli Hospital for the last couple of days. This is a bad outlook. Let me read you what basically a cursory look at it on even ChatGPT will say. My friend sent me this. The key risk factors when we look, what is the likelihood of death on an 88-year-old man with one lung undergoing treatment for a polymicrobial infection of the respiratory tract. Here's what more or less you get back. Age 88, the immune system is naturally weaker, making infections much more severe. Single lung, having only one lung, reduces respiratory reserve, making it harder to compensate for infection-related damage. Polymicrobial infection, this means multiple pathogens. It could be bacteria, fungi, viruses, could be some of each, one of each, whatever, are typically harder to treat and may indicate an already weakened immune system, which we know could be the case with Pope Francis. So pray for him. Treatment response. The effectiveness of antibiotics or antifungals, resistance patterns, and organ function impact survival. This remains to be seen. This is part of the contingency picture, why we don't know exactly how well he will do. Comorbidities, conditions like COPD, heart disease, diabetes, immunosuppression, and being overweight significantly increase mortality risk. Respiratory failure risk, if oxygen levels drop significantly or mechanical ventilation is required, mortality risk rises. So it's mild, with a mild to moderate infection, we don't really know this much. If it's mild to moderate, responding well to treatment, then it's a 10 to 30% chance of mortality risk. A severe pneumonia, if that's what it is, would require ICU care but not ventilator. 30 to 60% risk, making it around even odds. Respiratory failure requiring mechanical ventilation, it jumps from 70 to 90%. So Francis is not in that boat. If sepsis or multi-organ failure develops, mortality will exceed 90%. So this is pretty good. The best info we're going to get out of the Vatican, because they don't like to update us super accurately when a pope falls ill. And this has been the historical case. I would urge you to pray for Francis, like I said, that he gets his soul in order, which requires public acts concomitant to, the private state of his soul, because we want him to go to heaven. We want every Holy Father to go to heaven. And also for our sake, because there have been so many scandals created. Even in the last week, I'll read you a couple that he needs to undo and take steps, concrete steps toward undoing, even if it's in his, on his hypothetical deathbed. Do that because we want the Holy Father to get into heaven. Pray for the Holy Father for his sake. Pray sincerely, even if he hasn't been the best pope. Doesn't matter. Pray for him for his sake. We want every Christian to get into heaven. We want everyone to become a Christian. And you have to have the 7 sacraments. You got to be a real Catholic. If you're a leader, then remember you're judged by extra harsh standards. Cue up the 2 stumbling block quotations in New Testament directly by our Lord. So pray for him for his sake, but also pray for our sake, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If Pope Francis comes correct and says, look, I was wrong on all these areas, I want to get into heaven, then it'll be good for all these squabbling Catholics who have, and I've been one of them, undertaken, I guess, necessary attempted defenses against the Pope-splainers who are saying that Pope Francis's program of westernizing, liberalizing the church has been good. It hasn't. It hasn't been Catholic. It's not a Catholic scheme of governing or doctrine. So pray for him for his sake. Pray for him for our sake. On the personal end here, when I ask you to pray for him for his sake, Francis has expressed multiple times that one of his weaknesses is a deep psychological fear of pain. And this is one that some of us relate to more than others. That's one that, if you've ever been a chronic pain sufferer, I relate to a bit. So I don't want anyone, I wouldn't wish this on anyone on earth to have to confront their worst fear darkly, singularly, all alone in solitude. He does. I mean, think about all clerics. Their situation is different from ours as lay men. Yes, he has a whole bunch of people praying for him, but he doesn't have a wife and kids there. So that's a paucity, something that is felt in acute moments of sickness. And he's indicated several times, just emotional honesty, that he's especially afraid of this. So I really, as much as I've been frustrated and hurt by this pontificate and this pontiff, whenever he falls ill, and he's fallen ill a lot the last 4 years, I just remember that. To be scared and sick and uncomfortable in pain alone is bad, and he said it's extra bad for him. People have different fears. Some people are afraid of public speaking. Others are extra afraid of pain. That doesn't mean that people who don't list public speaking as a fear aren't a little bit afraid when they get up at a podium. Of course they are. Doesn't mean that all human beings aren't afraid of pain, but some just, we have our special kind of phobias. So if you've been frustrated at Francis, to produce the genuine disposition of sympathy, empathy, something that might help you is think about this. Meditate on the meaning of physical suffering and the scariness of the meaning of physical suffering. I mean, the meaning is sort of the solution to the scariness, but just as a final moment in your meditation, be like, well, Francis is confronting it right now. He's 88. Pray for him. We don't want him to be scared and suffering vaingloriously. We want the Holy Father to feel okay. Maybe it would not be vainglorious suffering if he just can kind of get scared into a sort of fear of God and undo some of the scandals recently. But either way, I pray for him. I pray for him sincerely. And I hope he starts feeling all right. Now, I'll say this much. This is a recent, a very recent couple of scandals created by this pontificate. Michael Haynes' tweet from 5 hours ago. About a week ago, on February the 9th, a female Anglican vicar concelebrated Mass at the altar and appeared to receive Holy Communion with Catholic bishops and priests. In video, she wears a blue stole. Mass was for installation of a new Archbishop of Chapeko, who welcomed her warmly. So this isn't directly Pope Francis's fault, but he's created the weaponized ambiguity about the two things related to this. Intercommunion with Anglicans and Lutherans, specifically Lutherans, but also Anglicans, at play here. And secondly, women, deacons, the ordination of ladies, definitely at play here. And it's a deadly sort of 1-2 punch. I'd say Francis needs to come correct on this issue. Secondly, Pope Francis has, over the last week, I guess right before he went into the hospital at Gemelli there, that the U.S. bishops essentially need to have an open borders policy. This was really bad. I'm looking for this last one. Where did that go? The border critique. Even, lots of people are saying, I think the Pope has lost his way a little bit. That's border czar Tom Homan. This is really problematic. This is really, really, really problematic that Francis has told the U.S. bishops several times. He's indicated through many different signals over the years, but most specifically over the last week, since Trump has really specified what the U.S. border policy is going to be, that this is evil, that it is outstripping of human dignity, which I think both of these things are false. And he has failed to understand the Thomistic teaching that the fourth commandment, to love and honor our father, means to honor and love our fatherland, and that this requires borders and walls. And the Vatican knows this because it has borders and walls. It has 21 or 23 foot high walls all around the Vatican. Francis seems to forget that. Pope Francis slated Donald Trump's border policy, but in December, the Vatican quietly made a base penalty of between 1 to 4 years in jail and a 10 to 25,000 euro fine for anyone illegally entering Vatican city-state. Penalties increase if the offender uses guns, vehicles, disguises, or is in a group, which are all indicia typically attaching to U.S.-Mexico borderline jumpers. They typically use guns, vehicles, disguises, or in a group. So in this Pope Francis surprise letter to all U.S. bishops in regard to immigration, in these delicate moments, he criticizes Trump's moves against illegal immigrants and Vance's citing of Ordo Amoris. Here's the direct quote. The rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. That's insane, right? To say that an illegal border jumper, if identified as a committer of an illegal action, that's wrong, literally violates common sense, Western civilization, and as I just cited, the Vatican's own strict policy on a 10,000 to 25,000 euro fine for border jumpers there. It is an untenable position. You guys already know this. You already know that an Anglican female cleric receiving Eucharist is a horrific thing. And so Francis's scandal by supporting both of these horrible, horrible atrocities is bad news for him, not only as a Catholic, but as the Catholic leader, the vicar of Christ on earth. This is him being a stumbling block to some extent. That's why when we pray for Francis, who's fearful of pain and fearful of being alone there in Gemelli Hospital. I know that hospital. It's like a Soviet-era bomb shelter. I mean, the doctors are really good, but it is not such a comforting place. I'm sure he has the best room in it, but it's not a comforting place, and he's there all alone.
It isn't.
Steph knows. She stayed there 29 nights when young Abby was born.
It has a great view of the dome of St. Peter's, though.
Yeah, that's one thing. Far away, you can see the dome. Steph would look at that every night, and they'd make me leave at 9 p.m. They'd kick out the husband. Steph was staying bedside with Abby through her first month. That was such a rough time. They'd kick me out at 9 p.m. I'd have to stumble home alone, and Steph and I never stay away for night. And she would always be comforted by the fact that right around the time I'd leave, around 9, it was in the middle of summer when Abby was born, they would turn on the St. Peter's light. So that was something. But the point is, pray for Francis, not just because he's scared, but because we know publicly all the scandals he's created. It's not because we've gossiped, it's because they're public acts that he's taken. When you have a bad leader, we've had this bad leader, you know all of the tyrannical things he's done. Well, a religious cleric as a tyrant is the worst kind of tyrant because he's done all these things to the church itself, to the body of Christ itself. So we're just praying that he is given the grace to come correct, to do so publicly, because there are no real private acts for a vicar of Christ as concerns the way he's governed the church. Do what he has to do to come correct for his soul and for our souls. And just, hope that he's not in physical discomfort. Hope that he can square himself with the Lord before his time comes due. He's 88. He's got a polymicrobial respiratory infection. The outlook's never good for an 88-year-old in the hospital. He's been in the hospital 4 times in the last 3 years. Wow. So just pray for him. Pray for him sincerely. This is not a backhanded compliment to say, pray for his soul that he comes correct. Pray for him for his sake. Given the whole history, the whole litany of, and I know him, I've done shows on the litany of Francis material heresies. Pray for him extra. And pray for him on an emotional and spiritual level as well, that he's afraid. He's afraid. Okay. God bless you all. God bless you all. Pray for the Pope. Pray for the Holy Father. Deus Vult.